Thanks, Stefan. Like I said, my name is Eric Madsen. I'm a farmer in west central Iowa. We've been organic for a little over 20 years. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the different tools that us three use on our own personal farms, some advantages, some disadvantages. And if you guys have any questions, we kind of want this to be a back and forth dialogue. We may ask other members of the audience if they have an answer or a different, thought on things versus what we do. Again, we kind of want this to be a back and forth kind of dialogue. We have it set up into 3 different parts, segments we'll talk about. Each one of us will talk about each segment, and then we'll move on to the next. The first segment we'll talk about is kind of pre-planting, sod termination, pre-plant tillage, and then we'll talk about blind cultivation and planting, and then we're going to talk about cultivation. So I'll let these guys introduce themselves.
All right, I'm Jaron Wilson. We farm in northwest Iowa up by Paulina. I guess my wife and I farm. We just went full-time in 2016, and we farm 107 acres. I like to say the 7 because it's a little cooler than just 100, so makes me a little bigger than I actually am. So that's kind of where we're at and what we're going to do.
I'm Dean Schultes. I've been farming organic myself for 10 years. Dad started back in 2001. I do corn, soybeans, oats, and hay rotation, and that's basically pretty much about me. If we want to get this on the road.
You bet. Okay, again, we're going to have the 3 kind of semi-topics. If you have questions, let's try to keep the questions pertaining to the topic we're on, and then at the end, if we have time, we can kind of wrap everything together. So we'll start off with pre-plant, including sod termination. And I guess the first thing I like this slide. This is from our farm 2 years ago, and the management between the 2 pictures was exactly the same. It's exactly the same seed variety. Everything was exactly the same. There's one big difference, though, obviously. Does anybody have an idea what caused that difference or what went wrong there? Rain. There you go, right away. The picture on the right, we planted right up until it rained, got rained out of the field, came back about, I think it was 13 days later, and that's the different weed control between the 2 treatments. And it was kind of mind-blowing that there could be that much, basically a never going to happen again clean bean field to a typical organic bean field. So I guess the point I kind of wanted to make is you can have all the fancy tools in the world, you can have the guidance, you can have everything set up this time of year, you're going to get your plan set up. Mother Nature's still the boss, and unfortunately sometimes Mother Nature wins, and there's nothing you can do about it. So first off, I'm going to start about tearing up cover crops or alfalfa. We like our corn to always follow a cover crop or alfalfa clover sod. The 2 main tools that we use is the first one is a Landau chisel plow, very common, very cheap, manufactured by several different manufacturers. The biggest thing that we do here is we take off these straight or twisted points and install a 20-inch sweep off the back, and that allows that chisel plow to cut the entire width of the machine versus just the strips that a regular chisel plow point would do. The rolling cutters on the front of the tool do a nice job of opening up the soil, sizing if you have any bigger residue, and it'll go through virtually anything. Works very well. The next tool that we've just been playing with recently is a John Deere 550 Mulch Master. I really like this tool. They're kind of hard to find, but if you can find one, they fit a lot of cases for organic, I feel. Again, a big wide sweep. They use 24-inch sweeps. And then kind of the key to this whole machine is on the back there, the 2 rows of the treader spader wheels. And what they do, they're kind of a spike. If you imagine a spike closing wheel for a planter, they're kind of similar to that. They run at about a 45-degree angle, and they both 45 degrees to the soil and 45 degrees vertically. And as they spin at speed, what they end up doing is kind of lifting that soil and lifting that crop residue or cut residue. And what that kind of does is it shakes the soil out of the roots of the plant that you're trying to tear up. And then that in turn lets that plant dry out faster and die faster. And it is kind of a neat how that works in tandem with the big wide sweeps and how it leaves that fluff of the exposed dried roots on top. That's a picture kind of what behind that mulch master leaves. You can see on the picture to the left here how you can see that the roots are right on top, and you can kind of see how there isn't hardly any soil left on the roots there. On the right is what we use with just the regular sweep chisel plow, and you can kind of see how the roots aren't exposed. There's still lots of soil in amongst the roots. And what will happen is that sod and alfalfa and clover will continue to grow until that soil in the root system dries out. Or on the left with the mulch master, that soil is already shaken out, and that plant will die a lot faster. Yeah, Margaret?
Are you going in the spring or the fall, some of both?
Margaret's question was if this is done in the spring or the fall. This is typically done in the spring. We farm in south, kind of west central, a little bit to the south Iowa. We do have some rolling hills, so we try to do virtually no fall tillage for erosion purposes.
How fast are you going with the mulch master?
With the mulch master, as fast as we can pull it, which right now is about 5-6 miles an hour. I think they are made to be pulled even faster than that. But tearing out the sod, the faster you go, it gets very exponentially harder to pull. Yep.
How deep are you running the sweep?
Oh, good point. I forgot to mention that. I do kind of follow the previous presenter. We are only running 3 to 4 inches deep, just deep enough to get underneath the crown of that alfalfa or clover. And I'll talk more about that in the future parts, but 3 to 4 inches deep, I don't see any reason to go deeper than that. On soybeans, we have 2 main different first passes with soybeans. We'll either disc. This field was this year, we are kind of playing with cover crops ahead of our soybeans. Don't have a set system yet, but this was winter wheat that was drilled into soybeans last year after corn harvest. We use 2 different discs. We have a 1 on 7.5 inch spacing, which is more of a finishing disc. Does a lot better job of sizing residue, leaving a smoother seed bed. We also do have a regular typical 9 inch space disc, which is probably a little more of your first pass tillage, burying residue. But it does leave it a little bit rougher on top. Again, trying to go shallow. We were probably only going about 2 and 2.5 inches deep here, and trying to leave this mulch on top of the soil. Then next we'll come through with our field cultivator or soil finisher. Typically there'll be a week, 2, maybe even more between the first tillage and when we come back with the field cultivator right ahead of planting. We let the weeds get germinated and come up, get that first flush of weeds coming, and then try to hit it with the field cultivator, typically the day before we plant. What we're currently using now is a Great Plains discavator. It's got a set of straight turbo coulters in the front, and then followed by a typical field cultivator shanks in the middle and a heavy 5-bar spike harrow in the back. I like this tool. I don't know if the cutters are really necessary. In a no-till system, they maybe would help, but for where we've typically already done some form of tillage, I don't know if they're really necessary. But the one thing that I do like about some of the newer field cultivators and finishers are the shank pressure is way heavier on these newer tools versus some of the older tools. This particular field cultivator has a 180-pound shank pressure or trip pressure, and I find that in organics we're relying on this tool to take out weeds. And like what we're doing here, this was again a wheat cover crop that had regrown since we ran over it the first pass. But on some of the older field cultivators, when they hit bigger weeds, or if they're a little bit sloppy, that shank will start to trip back out of the way, and you won't get the full cut of the shank, and then you'll end up getting strips of weeds in between each individual sweep. So if you're looking for a different field cultivator, kind of pay attention to shank pressure. And also on some of the older field cultivators, if you grab the shank and it moves back and forth 6 inches, probably is very common, but either needs some work or need to kind of think about how to tighten that up. Because again, as you're hitting big weeds, if that shank can just shoot, it's going to want to shoot over out of the way and not stay locked in the ground and cutting the full width. So that kind of gets us up to planting, and then we'll let Jaron kind of go over his method of what they use on their farm. Oh, one more thing about the field cultivator. It does have a heavy spike tooth 5-bar rigid harrow. I like that in the fact that our soils are a little bit clayey. It does do a nice job of busting up clods, but the other thing it does is it leaves a lot of the residue on top, which again in our hills and kind of contours, we like leaving as much residue on top as possible. And the other picture I wanted to show, again, we're running it real shallow. I'm probably 2 to 3 inches deep. That's probably too deep. Maybe you could even go shallower, but sometimes when you run that shallow, if you don't have a real even seed bed, it can be hard to get it to go in the ground at all in some places. And some places you may, if you're only trying to run an inch deep, as the soil is rough and not real even, some places you're probably not going an inch or not going at all. In other places you might be going 2 inches. So there's a happy medium there where you need to go deep enough to make sure that the tool is engaged. But at the same point, as he said, you don't want to get down in that anaerobic zone and bring up all that weed seeds from down below that are laying dormant.
All right. I'm going to kind of tell you guys where we are, and it may not be where we want to be. So out of all of these guys, I'm probably the only one that moldboard plows. I grew up doing it since I was 12. It's a hard one to kill. It just seems to work on our soils. But with that said, this year I was pushing water with my front tire because the only window we got was 3 days, and we had rain before and after. And so I don't want to do that again. I don't want to see my soil structure just destroyed and disintegrated. And so we've tried just about everything. We chisel plowed this spring also. Again, with a wet year, when you have grass in your sod and you get rain continually, that sod, what does it do? Anybody know? It just keeps growing. And so we have problems where we would chisel plow, we come out, hit it with a disc, roll those sod clumps, and then 3-4 days after a rain, we come back and they re-rooted. And so if you're going to use a chisel plow with a wide sweep, like Eric had said, I kind of view that as a fall tillage if you can do it. I don't like to fall till, but it is something that you might consider doing in the fall. So with that said, so I don't really like a chisel plow. Another thing that we've tried is for sod termination is running a vertical till disc. So if you've seen those with the ginormous big discs on them, we have a custom operator that can run one real early for us. We've done that, and then we've followed it with what I like to call, well, they deemed it a good name here, a Cultivator. Has anybody seen a Deutz 1400 Cultivator? Anyone run one? No. Okay. Anyone run a 1200, a Deutz 1200? No. Okay. Don't get a 1200. From what I've read and what I've learned, if you have any sort of trash with a Deutz 1200 Cultivator, you're not going to do it. It's just going to plug. So you want to look for a 1400 if you're interested in this route. I like this picture also because this is the first year we owned the Cultivator, and that's a very good stance for me because I'm out there looking like, what am I doing? So, I mean, this was uncharted territory for us. This field, what you're looking at was after that vertical till disc, and this is first pass, kind of where you can see where the Deutz has been with just the Deutz field cultivator. The other thing I like about the Deutz, Eric was mentioning this, you grab a hold of a shank and it moves on most field cultivators, at least the ones that are in my price point. With the Deutz, they don't use a spring. What they have is a clamp that clamps that shank onto your toolbar, and they use rubber bushings. And everything I've read says those rubber bushings don't wear out. And so if you grab a hold of one of those, I mean, this is an old machine. This isn't new. If I grab a hold of one of those and a sweep is moving, it probably means the bolt on the sweep is loose. That shank does not move. And so we run, I think we've had up to a 12-inch sweep on these. And it's really good coverage. It gets, I have noticed if you're on a contour, once in a while you'll see a weed slip through. But again, if something's moving on that sweep, there's probably a nut or a bolt that's loose, and you better get it tightened up because it does a great job. And I really like it because depth adjustment is kind of tricky, but it also allows you to adjust your wings and your centerfold. So if you've got your tire tracks running in the middle and they're a little more compacted and you want to get below those, you can raise that center or lower that center down just below your tire tracks, and then you can leave your wings shallow and still not cause and not move as much soil. So I love this, Deutz. We use it a lot in our pre-plant. For sod termination, we're probably looking at moving towards a rotavator. This is something I asked Sam about after the session. I don't know if you guys are familiar with rotavators. They're big rototiller, basically, a garden tiller. We like the idea of them because you're only going anywhere from 1 to 2 inches or just below the crown of your alfalfa. So you're not going 6 inches. You're not slipping into that 8-inch with a plow like you would. And you can, they're slow. They might be slow, but you're getting everything with one pass. Because with our plow, what we're doing is we're ending up with about 4 passes. You got to plow, you got to disc it, you disc it again, and then you field cultivate it just to try and lighten your soil because everything is heavy. I mean, when you're plowing, it's heavy. So one thing I didn't mention that I'll probably show too, we've also tried plowing and using one of these. Anyone know what these are? Cultipacker. This is a brilliant, I don't know what model it is. We have a custom operator that can run one of these for us. And we've had some good success plowing and using one of these once or twice. It's nice because the wheels kind of break up your sod, kind of levels everything out. But then you've got a shank that you can drop in and just kind of lighten that soil up and kind of move it around so you get an even seed bed. But it does take horsepower. You can stop an 8400 with a 30-foot brilliant cultipacker. I mean, you can just drop it in its tracks. And one of the, let's see, am I going to get onto that? Catch my breath here. So that's kind of our pre-plant for our corn. We typically are going into sod with our corn. If we get into our beans, I'm usually running that Deutz field cultivator. I should be getting paid by Deutz right now, but they're not paying me. I also really like the Deutz. Sam talked about this in his session too. I'm going to use you a lot, Sam. But talking about sweep angle too. So a typical who knows what their sweep angle is on their field cultivator right now? What's your typical sweep angle?
47.
47. Okay, this is running a 54 degree, just the same as your your row crop cultivator. So what that does is it's not digging deep, it's doing more of a cutting action. And so you're able to kind of set that depth and not throw so much soil if you're trying to avoid that. So again, I don't know how readily available these are, but if you can find one, I love them. So yeah, soybeans will hit our corn stalks with one of let me just back up so you we'll hit our corn stalks with one of these probably a week or two before we're thinking of planting, so as early as we can, just to stimulate weed growth. I want to see a good flush. I mean, if it's green when I come back for the second pass, that's great, because I know that's how many weeds I'm not going to be dealing with later in the season. So we'll hit our corn stalk ground with this 7 to 10 days before we're going to plant. We'll hit it again for a second pass right before the planter. So that's kind of where we're at with that. One thing I will mention, this is kind of a tool that maybe you're not using. Dean will probably speak because I think you use this more. But I could be mistaken too. Anyway, if we have a field that has, is it? Okay, I'll let you talk about this too then. If we have a field that has a lower pressure of weeds and the soil structure seems to be good and there's just less pressure from the ecological standpoint, like Sam said. This year we tried something interesting. We used our doits, and it has a hitch on the back, and we hitched our spike tooth harrow on the back of that doits. And we ran that doits and the spike tooth harrow for a single pass and planted the next morning. And that was a fabulous seed bed, because what happened was we would tear up all the root balls from your corn stalks, and then you would pull this spike tooth harrow behind, and what did it do? If your soil structure is good, that soil should be really crumbly. So what that spike tooth did is it took all those root balls and it just shook them loose of dirt. And any weed root ball that you brought up, it shook it loose, and it was just beautiful crumble. So the only thing I would say is make sure you get your field cultivator deep enough. There were a few spots where we only hit it one pass, and so anywhere it was a little bit hard, I didn't get under the root weed. And so that's something that you have to think about with that. But so that's kind of our pre-plant. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Dean.
I'm gonna kind of just talk about what I do before pre-plant, and it's mostly gonna be corn, soybeans, going into corn and soybeans. I usually start in April, right after planting small grains. I'll head out in the cornfield, and I'll disc the stalks to get everything mulched up, broke down, so that I'm able to get the field cultivator through it right before I want to plant. And this also gives me other opportunities to do like a spring cover crop or something like that, which I've done in the past to do weed suppression. It does work, so there are advantages and there are disadvantages to that. So that's corn ground. Soybean ground is kind of a thing that you gotta be out there every day and watch for, and watch the weeds when they come. Sometimes I've done this in the past, and I've used a spike tooth harrow like what Jaron uses, and I'll go out there and I'll just run it across the rows, and basically what that's gonna do is knock down the ridges from cultivating the previous year, and it'll cover up any weeds that are growing in between the rows, and then obviously it knocks down the dirt that was where the row was at, which helps keeps the weeds at bay. And on a year like last year, where it rained the middle of May, the rain came and it rained for 2 weeks, and you thought, what am I gonna do now? Well, with doing this early on, and with the disking early on too, it keeps the weeds at bay. And so, after those 2 weeks, my weeds were maybe an inch, maybe going 1.5 inches tall, when you could see other farmers had 1 foot, 2 foot weeds, and it would look like a jungle. So after the 2 weeks of rain, you thought, what am I gonna do? Well, for me, it was pretty simple. I pulled the field cultivator out, field cultivated it twice, and that basically killed all the weeds off. It wasn't a big deal. There wasn't too much trash. It was actually kind of nice, and for being stressed out for 2 weeks, it was a relief. So you like to try and get your field prep done, your major field prep done right away as soon as you can. And then about the time before you want to start planting, I usually field cultivate as shallow as I can. So if your idea of shallow is 2 inches, you run 2 inches. If it's 1.5 inches, run 1.5 inches if you can make it work. The thing I've learned with field cultivators is that they come with the manufacturer's specs for the width of the sweep. Put bigger sweeps on. If you gotta put new sweeps on, put bigger sweeps on. Just do it, get it over with. You're gonna thank yourself in the end. Just because if you're on a hillside, the cultivator wants to slide itself down. If you're going around a terrace, you're obviously making a turn. So you're gonna get everything that you can get. Also, the next thing is where your waterways are at, where your rows meet rows from previous years. That's usually where your biggest weed pressure is going to be. Hit them twice, maybe 3 times. Just get that soil fluffed up a little bit, worked up a little bit. And also make sure when you're field cultivating to follow the contours as much as you can. Do not go up and down the hills, because if it rains, it will wash out big time. I've learned that from experience. You know, also the next thing is being able to watch the weather. The nice thing about getting the major tillage done early is that if you don't get rain right before you plant and you have to do your double disking or triple disking or whatever you got to do, you're able to go in there shallow, 2 inches, inch and a half, whatever it takes to get the dirt broke up, the weeds clumps off the weeds, whatever it takes, so that you don't lose soil moisture. Because humidity, wind, if the humidity is low and it's a strong wind, you're going to lose all your soil moisture in a matter of hours. It's happened to me before. And trust me, it's not fun to try and go planting and finding moisture when there's no moisture to be found. It was probably 2012 or 13, one of those 2 years. I had 3 bean fields. The first 2 I did perfect, not a problem. The third one, I went out, it was in the evening. I went out around 7:30, 8 o'clock that evening. I was like, this is going to be late enough. The sun's going down, no problem. I'm going to field cultivate this. I'm going to be back in first thing in the morning. I'm going to be able to plant this, no problem. The wind was blowing 15, 20 mile an hour. Humidity was low all night long. I came back in that morning, and my ground had dried out like 3 inches down. And I remember Dad bringing the planter out. Dad goes, "There's no way we're planting beans today." And I looked at him, I was like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "That dirt is dried out." I was like, "Oh man." So so in that instance, we had to come up with plan B. You know, what are we gonna do? Well, in that instance, we went back out with a field cultivator, and I dropped the field cultivator deep in the ground as I could go, and we were just gonna we dried the ground out, completely dried it out. And then we went in with the planter and planted, you know, 2 inches, 2¼ inches down. The beans were in dry ground. The whole idea for doing this was that we don't want the beans to germinate unevenly. We want them to come up all at the same time. So basically what we were going to wait for was a rain to come and basically get the soil moistures all the same so that the beans come up all at the same time. Great, okay. That worked out great. It took a whole week before we got 2 inches of rain. So, that was quite the field that year anyway. So that's kind of the next thing. So you kind of got to be your own meteorologist, watch the weather. Also, finding a website or a weather app that you can watch the next 10-day, next 10-day forecast. I used to use IntelliCast. It was perfect. It gave me the 10-day forecast, and below that, it had line graphs that would show me by hour on each day what the humidity was going to do that day, what the wind was going to do that day, and which direction the wind was going to blow for every hour for every one of those 10 days. And I could predict, you know, the wind's going to blow this way and then it's going to change this way. I can predict, okay, there's a pretty good chance it's going to rain this day. So maybe I want to do something the day before or 2 days before or whatever I got to do. I mean, you as a farmer, you really got to watch the weather, what's going on. There's just a ton of variables to be watching for. So that's kind of my deal on what I do is just basically get out there before you can. Do what you got to do early. If you want to play around with cover crops, if you want to play around with something, you have the time to do that. But yet, when it comes to planting, be able to go shallow, kill off all your weeds, and plant into a clean slate field. I think I'll probably go into this right away. Kind of my planter, way I kind of got my planter set up is basically I plant at a depth where I know I'm going to have adequate moisture for germination, and yet that seed is going to pop out of the ground as soon as possible. I don't want to wait, 10 days for corn to pop out of the ground. I don't want to wait, 7 days for beans to pop out of the ground. ideally, if beans could pop out of the ground in 4 days, that'd be great. And corn pop out of the ground in 5 days, that'd be great. We all know that probably doesn't happen, but to try and get to where it possibly could, row cleaners are a good thing. I use what they call furrow openers. They're just 2 discs right in front of the row unit, and I'll push an inch of dirt out of the way. That makes sure I get trash out of the way. That makes sure I get lumps out of the way. That kind of ensures that I'm going to get my seed as much as possible the same depth in the ground, give every seed the same possibility to come up at the same time on the same day. And this all coincides with being able to run the cultivator at a consistent speed and so on, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of our pre-plan of what we do. I don't know if anybody has questions on pre-plant for any of us. He asked what do I use instead of IntelliCast. IntelliCast switched to Weather Underground. They have the same maps for it, but my struggle right now is for me to be able to hit that 10-day forecast and for it to pull up the 10 days. It's gotten better. Sometimes I can get it, the next time I can't. But it gives me the 10-day forecast, and then you scroll down, and then you can hit options for what you want to see. If you want to see humidity, wind direction, I think it'll give barometric pressure, and it'll even give the percentages of chance of rain in a line graph for every day. So that's kind of what I've been using. It also helps when you want to make hay too. But yeah. He's asked about spring cover crops. When I first started it, I did wheat. For me, it didn't matter what I used. Wheat. Towards the end, I used oats. So I planted. The thing with doing the cover crop thing is you have to figure your window from when it's going to germinate to when you want to terminate it. Because you don't want it to get, for me, for oats, it was basically 10 inches tall. I didn't want to get it any taller than that. Basically, the reason for that is if you do get rain and you can't get in there to till it under, disc it under, or whatever, however you want to put it under as a green manure crop, it was going to stay wet. And if you know anything about trying to work wet ground and then you're putting a green manure basically in the ground, and you get rain on that again, it makes it pretty mucky, and I've had that happen to me once. But it is a great way to build your soil. You just have to manage the time when you plant it to the time you want to terminate it. So you may want that's where watching your weather comes in handy. Is you may have to terminate it a week before you want to plant. It did suppress a lot of grasses. I believe anyway. It helped me on my grasses anyway. It was a pretty good deal.
About if anybody had tried using a winter cover crop planted in the spring, so I assume like winter rye or winter wheat planted in the spring. I think that's right. So it does not vernalize. I guess my thought was that what I've been told is it would get maybe 6 inches to a foot tall and just kind of go dormant. And I don't know if anybody else here has tried. Margaret, maybe you have some experience with that, or
Check the PFI research results. It's very competitive against broadleaves, and it is not at all competitive against grasses. at all. Is-
I did it this spring with soybeans, planted it May 18th, I believe. 3 bushels of rye and 180,000 population of soybeans. And they were pretty weedy with foxtail when I went to combine them. But it did have a pretty good impact on the broadleaf, just like you said. But I think maybe the rain that came after that, maybe. I got 33 bushels an acre for the soybeans. I was happy. I think I probably did add to my seed bank, though.
I've planted winter rye in the last 3 years ahead of my beans in the spring. The first year I did it, I planted the rye and then I planted the beans the day after. I had about, where I did that for 10 acres on that test plot, I had 50 to 60 bushel beans. I haven't been able to do that since. So I had really good success the first year. Yeah, they look like commercial beans, conventional beans. Weather's a big factor, like the gentleman said over on the other side of the room. The foxtail came really late. It held everything off until it quit raining in August, and then it rained, and the foxtail came after that, and we couldn't do anything with it. Margaret?
Just one other comment, Eric. Wisconsin's been researching that, and they time weeded those soybeans and rye.
No.
to try
That's
to
very
prevent that
important,
toxin.
absolutely. Yeah, don't change your tillage technique at all, just because you have rye in there.
But they thought that time weeding did some good, although they didn't have it with them with that. They just did it as a standard practice.
Okay. Okay, well, I think we're going to move on to the next section so we can keep going here. So, okay, we're going to move on to planting. And I guess I have a little bit different theory about my final seed bed prep than probably a lot of people in here. I guess I don't worry about having the perfect seed bed for my corn before I go in with the planter. I guess my thought is if I have a perfect, absolutely fine soil, completely even, I've created a perfect seed bed for my corn, yes, but what else did I do create? A perfect seed bed for my weeds, exactly. So, and this is just kind of something we've been, I guess, over time kind of evolved to. I'm not afraid to leave it a little bit rough. As you can see in the picture on the left, that was this year. You know, there's still quite a bit of residue. There's some clods. It was too wet when we field cultivated it, whatever, this year. But it really doesn't bother me, I guess. My kind of goal is I can do that final seed bed prep with the planter itself, just in the area that the planter itself hits. And if the middle of the row is rough, cloddy, I guess I really don't care. It seems to me I get a lot less small seeded weeds especially come up if you don't have that super fine settled soil there in the middle of the rows. Great. The small seeded weeds that come in the top inch or so, it's hard for them to grow up through that trash, through them clods and different things. That soil's dried out. We do have trash whippers on our planter. What we usually set them to do for is to blow that top inch, maybe inch and a half even of soil out of the way, get those clods, get that residue pushed aside. If it turns out dry, you know, that top where it's super dried out, blow that out of the way, get that planter down into the nice, firmer, moist soil. And then we do run a Schlegel closing wheel, which is kind of a hybrid between a spiked closing wheel and a solid closing wheel. It's like knuckles on your hand. As it rolls, it kind of shoves the soil down in, not in a smooth ribbon, but just kind of as it crumbles the loose soil in on the top. And as that gets to speed, it gets a mini rotary hoe effect of it leaves that soil on top of the seed fairly loose for the most part. And I really like that method. And so as you can see there, you know, we don't have a perfectly smooth seed bed by any means. The soybeans, I'm just going to touch for 5 seconds here because probably only about 2, maybe 3 people in this room do this method, and it's a subject for a whole different talk. But we do still ridge till the majority of our soybeans. We like this method, not for everybody by any means. If you want to know more about it, ask us later or ask my father. He loves ridge till. He lives for ridge till, so find him. Vic Madsen, ridge till, find him. Pre-emerge harrowing, we've kind of went away from this recently. When we do it, we use a tine harrow. I call it a poor man's tine weeder. You get a lot of small points that go maybe an inch at the most deep, fairly cheap compared to the tine weeder. I have seen guys that'll go into like spiking or V2 corn with one of these, and you can play with the hydraulic cylinder, maybe put half of it down if you only need to use half of it. You don't have to necessarily put the entire thing on the ground if it's too aggressive with it all the way down. I haven't personally tried that. I might in the future, but we went away from the pre-merge harrowing for the most part, partly for the fact the last few years it's been so late when we've planted, the crop's been up in 4 to 5 days. I'll go in with the rotary hoe and start cultivating. Also for the fact I think sometimes when we settle that seed bed back down again, yeah, we maybe can slow down one flush of weeds, but when we settle that back down, we also start another flush. So I'll let the other guys talk about that do more than that, but we've kind of went away from that. So real quick, a couple different types of rotary hoes we get asked a lot. John Deere 400 is probably the most common one. The wheels are spaced very close together. They can and do plug in corn stalks, root balls, rocks especially. You can get them jammed between the two wheels. Both wheels stop turning and the whole thing slides. We also have a Case 181 MT, which is kind of a no-till or minimum tilled rotary hoe. They're harder to find, but they do, as you can see, the wheels are spaced farther apart. They will go through standing corn stalks fine. Our ridge till soybeans, they work great in. You know, rocks and things don't plug them up. So another thing on the rotary hose, you want lots of action. You really want that soil to be flying around you. And if you're looking at used rotary hose, you want the spoons of the wheel or the cup of the individual spike of the wheels to be about the size of a dime. If they get much smaller than that, then the spike's getting pretty worn, and it's hard to get that lifting action from the cup of the rotary hoe wheel. This was day 8 rotary hoeing. Worked absolutely perfect that year. We had, I believe, a ½ inch of rain between planting and this picture. Had a real nice crust. That rotary hoe broke up that ½ inch crust absolutely beautifully, and that's kind of the perfect scenario for a rotary hoe. This is kind of a neat picture I took last year too. Does rotary hoeing help? Well, you can see right to the edge of the field, where sometimes you wonder when you're rotary hoeing, am I doing more harm than good? If you look back and you can see, you know, you're plucking some corn out, or you look back and the rock screen's covered in soybeans, you think you're really, what am I doing out here? You know, I'm taking out half my crop. But even if you can't see anything, it really does do more than you think. Yeah, quick question.
Before we move on to the next presenter.
Yep.
You mentioned that when you run your field cultivator, you're not focused on making that absolute flat seed bed.
Yep.
Do you find that negatively impacts the performance of your harrow or your rotary hoe, since they're now being brought into a field that has a little bit of rolling action to it?
Yeah, the question was if by leaving the field rough and creating a little bit of furrows with the disc openers, if I find that negatively affects when we come back through with the harrow or the rotary hoe. I actually think maybe if anything it helps me, because it allows you you can bring that soil back in around the row very easily, and then as that ridge, as you level that back off, you fill that little void back in, and then you can bury some of the just emerging weeds actually easier, versus if you had the tabletop smooth level, it's hard to get any soil back in around that. So I actually feel that it maybe helps me. And also if I don't come back through the first cultivation, there again, you've got that ridge right there that wants to go back in around the row. So I actually find that it helps in that case versus hurts.
Okay, so we use a Yetter rotary hoe, and I call it the red-green because we have half Yetter rotary hose and we have half John Deere hose on there. The reason being, there was a good deal on some used rotary hose. They would have all been black if we had bought them new, but that's why we have it. But don't be afraid of rotary hose. I love rotary hose. That's all we use, and I I typically schedule in my rotary hoe 3 days after I plant. I just schedule it. And if you're in doubt, do it. That's just kind of my rule of thumb, because every time I've not done it, it's always been worse than if I had done it and killed a few beans. It's hard. I mean, you'll go out there and you're like, man, I'm killing stuff. But it's like, if you don't do it, you're going to be out there kicking yourself because you didn't do it and you got 100 weeds where you could have had maybe 5 or 6. So we rotary hoe 3 to 4 days after planting, and then again 3 to 4 days after that first rotary hoe. And that's almost scheduled for us. And that works well with our soil type. We have a really flat ground, very straight. I was going to talk to that question about clods too. When we chisel plowed this year, we rotary hoed after that, and I'll tell you, that was the hardest field to stay in the seat because of all those dirt clods. But it's still important to go out and rotary hoe it, because what you are hitting, you're getting those weeds. The only downside is if your hoe's picking up a clod, there's a chance it could throw it on a corn plant. So that's something that we have with our sod chunks, is you have to monitor that. You might have to slow down. You might have to avoid looking behind you. That's something I do occasionally too. So, and when we're hoeing, I like this picture because it helped me understand what I actually try and shoot for. Let's see, which the ones that stage 3 to 5 of the cotyledon is kind of where I stay away from. So if you need a visual of where, if it's anything before stage 3 or after stage 5, we typically see a reduced amount of beans being killed. So that's just kind of your practical idea of what to look for. And again, speed, I like the rotary hoe because I'm usually going 11 to 12 miles an hour, and I just go. I don't even. I mean, I'll look behind. I'll maybe pitch the bar a little bit. If you're looking for a little more pressure, you can tip it back. It'll put a little more pressure on your down pressure springs, or tip it forward. That will also lighten it up. But I typically don't do too much with that. The one thing I will say with rotary hoes, if you don't have a battery operated impact, get one, because you'll be cleaning your rotary hoe bearings and wheels often. We pick up trash like crazy, whether it's net wrap, whether it's baling wire, or I think I've even pulled off a truck mud flap off of one of the tines before. An impact is just a tool that you want to carry with you, because if a wheel just stops spinning and you're out there trying to cut off some net wrap with your pocket knife, when you can take 2 minutes and pop it off, pull it off, put it back together, it'll save you a lot of time. So that's just something I tend to carry when I'm doing that. And that's pretty much what we do with our pre-cultivation, is just a rotary hoe. So any questions on that? I'll turn it over to Dean.
Well, my my pre-cultivation, my blind cultivation is pretty simple. I stick with the spike tooth harrow again, and that's generally 4 days after planting. Generally, I say that. This all depends on the weather and what the weather tells you what you need to do, but from what I've read and what I've done over the years, 4 days is a pretty good number. You could do it the 3rd day, you could do it the 5th day. It works out good for me. I've gone more to the spike harrow. If you go out there and your ground is hard, it's crusted, you may want a double harrow with the spike tooth harrow. And the way I do it is I'll set the tractor halfway between each pass so I can watch where I'm going on my row. So one tire will be where I went, the other tire's on the row, so I don't drive over the row. If I had GPS and I could trust GPS, I'd probably just regular harrow it and then run GPS for the second go around if you can stay off the row. And that could be 2 days after you did it the first time, or 3 days after you harrowed the first time, right before the crop comes up. I have harrowed corn that has spiked through the ground already. I've had good luck with that too. I've had no problems with that. Usually I do it in the afternoon when the ground's the warmest. The corn plant is able to wiggle one way or the other around the spikes. And also keeping in mind that when I planted, I pushed away an inch of ground. So I'm still up off the ground a little bit. And I'm not necessarily setting the spikes, straight down. I'm more at an angle, maybe 25 degrees, 15, 25, 30, somewhere in that neighborhood. So, and keeping in mind you're also going 8-9 miles an hour, so the faster you go, the more that harrow section is going to raise off the ground. And I do throw truck tires on my harrow sections to add more weight to make sure I bust the ground up, because harrow sections alone can be pretty light. Beans?
How sharp are you going with your tine?
Oh, maybe, like I said, 15 to 30 degrees, depending on what's going on. Also keeping in mind that you should run a pass, a few hundred feet, get off the tractor and look. That's really the best thing you do at doing any of these tillage things. Even with a field cultivator trying to go as shallow as you can, get off the tractor and look and make sure you're getting every single sweep is getting in the ground like you want it to. If you have to put it in the ground a little bit more, put it in the ground a little bit more. If the harrow needs to be set a little bit more angle, set a little more angle, a little less angle. You'll thank yourself for getting off the tractor and just taking the time to look. Beans, kind of the same thing, 3-4 days after planting. I have harrowed beans that were peeking through the ground. I've done it. It works great for me. Somebody else might not think so. Again, my planter's set to push a little bit of dirt out of the way so that when it goes to go through, it's not nailing them bean plants right on. So that's kind of my blind harrowing. I do run a rotary hoe, and it's the John Deere 400, same as what Eric uses. And that's my theory with the rotary hoe is I don't want to do it that many times. The last 2-3 years, I've did one pass with the rotary hoe, and then I've turned around the next day and started cultivating. And the rotary hoe could be a week after planting, could be 10 days after planting, just kind of depends on what the stage of the plant is at the time. And to really know that, you just take the rotary hoe out there, run it through a few hundred feet, get off and look. If you're pulling plants out of the ground, obviously it's not the time to be rotary hoeing. So you just kind of put it back in the shed, wait for another day. And that's kind of my pre-plant or pre-cultivation, pre-plant or post-plant, kind of what I do anyway. Is there any questions for any of us on our blind cultivation?
I'm tempted by these rotary tillers. I'm curious though, we're itty bitty. Do they make itty bitty rotary tillers? Like could we put together DIY some like little 4-row, 2-row? I mean, we're itty bitty. Do they make them itty bitty?
So the question is, how small of a rotary hoe can you get? Smallest one that I have is a 15-footer. Here's the thing with the rotary hoes and making them smaller. You just go to a welding shop, find a rotary hoe, go to a welding shop, have them make exactly what you want. Because they actually come in sections, and I think they're like 4-foot sections.
36 inches to
36
inches, the ones I've seen.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. And you could even make them smaller if you really had to. Yeah.
You could buy a big one and just chop the ends off too.
And you got lots of parts. Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to, one more, then we're going to keep going so we can get through our rest of our presentation. Yep. Yep.
Very important to have that cut.
Yep.
What we do is weld them hoe bits
Okay.
on there. That's just huge. They're narrower, they go in the ground deeper, they're a lot wider than even a brand new hoe. But it takes a lot of time to put them on, but once you put them on there, they last forever.
Right. The comment was about the rotary hoe, the spoons on the rotary hoe. And he said that he welds on what they're called hoe bits, I believe. And they're an actual piece of steel that you weld on to each individual spike of the wheel of the rotary hoe. And they're actually wider even than a regular rotary hoe wheel. And I think they kind of have more of a tapered point to the end of them. Is that?
Yeah, they're just like an end of a spoon or a fork. You know, they're pretty thin, so they go on the ground.
Very good. I've seen them. I have not used them, but.
Doug back here, what would you say for time to redo a hoe? What do you think it would take to do it?
To properly rebuild a rotary hoe will include replacing the bearing,
Mm-hmm.
probably the flanges, because it'll get loose. Allow an hour and 15 minutes per wheel.
Okay, so I had him just explain, if you guys didn't hear that in the back, about an hour and 15 minutes per wheel for welding on those new spoons and redoing a bearing.
One thing to point out, I bought all new wheels last year. They're a bigger diameter, John Deere wheel. They were bigger diameter than the old ones. I don't think you could mix them. You bought new ones, they couldn't, unless you specifically found the same diameter. The new ones were all bigger.
Yeah, unless you're running, if you are running some sort of ridge and you're not eliminating it, you could run your big wheels down in the bottom of your ridge and leave your smallers up top. If you're getting into precision and you can kind of follow that. That might be something you could do too.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to move on to cultivating, everybody's favorite topic. I'm just going to real quickly try to blow through these so we can get lots and lots of questions. We have a cultivator addiction. We have way too many cultivators. But they're cheap, and I don't like turning wrenches more than I have to. So what we found is we have 4, 5, 6 cultivators we'll use every year. We have them set up for different stages of crop or different conditions. We'll back up to one, pick it up and go, drop it, pick up a different one, pick it, go. We can save a ton of time versus completely switching the whole setup of the cultivator for each condition. So I'm just going to real quick blow through the 3 main styles that we use. The Noble Vibrashank, it's kind of similar to what Sam said, the European ones. 5 shanks per row, they're good for loose soil conditions, good for small plants. Limited residue clearance, and somewhat limited on the amount of soil you can get moving. This is using the Noble rotary hoe. This was on some sod ground. Hadn't rained since we planted it. I believe this was like 2014 maybe. Worked great, very good at stirring that loose soil, getting those small weeds. There's a picture of Dad. If you want to kind of watch this video and just watch it, how the shank itself kind of vibrates and shakes around, and kind of how the soil, a small amount of soil flows off that shank as it goes by. Next, we come to an IH 133C shank, probably the most common style of cultivator out there. They use a basic field cultivator shank and sweep arrangement. They fit most situations, work well, moderate residue clearance. Kind of an all-around cultivator that most guys will, if they have one, this is kind of the style they have. They're a little bit limited in the amount of adjustments that you have. You can move them in and out. Some of them you can move the shank up and down. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but kind of the most common one, average cultivator. One thing you really got to watch, and we had to redo them on this cultivator, is the bushings and the parallel linkages can get real sloppy on these older ones. And then that cultivator's running side to side, varying, and you'll end up with one sweep maybe going 4 inches deep, and the other side is just kind of scratching on top of the ground. So again, just grab those shanks, feel how tight that whole parallel linkage system is. My favorite's the Buffalo. There's different styles. We run 4600s for the most part. They're set up with a residue cutting stabilizing disc in the very front, followed by 2 cutaway discs that either pull away or push towards the row in the middle, and then 1 single sweep in the back that cuts out big weeds. These I like. You can make them do just about anything. We've went into weeds knee to waist high before. I've also used them this past year and several times on first pass. Again, you can adjust about anything on them, in, out, up, down. If you're going to get one of these, get a cordless impact wrench. Makes your life a whole lot easier. I really am a big fan of the cutaway discs. They run right next to the row on first pass, and they pull away from the row. And what I've found is that these cutaway discs, just by the nature of them pulling, they will grab whatever they come in contact with and pull it in. A sweep, if you can have a sweep running that same distance from the row, just by the nature, if it's pushing, sometimes what will happen is that sweep will push the weed over a little bit, or maybe cut half of it off, and then it'll stand back up, and some of the roots are still engaged in the soil, and then it'll regrow. With the cutaway disc, it's pulling away. If it grabs a hold of it with that sharp leading edge, it tears it completely out 9 times out of 10. The downside of that is if you run one of these and get off the row, your row's gone. There's no coming back. There is zero forgiveness when you've got the cutaway disc set really tight. Here's another video. Just watch the action. I like this soil. I'm going about 5.5 miles an hour here, and just watch that soil just exploding off those disc killers, and watch that, how it's pulling everything away. There's nothing getting just pushed off to the side. I don't know if we can run that again. And just watch that soil as it's coming into that row. We've got a ton of soil just being thrown right at that row and covering up them small weeds. And the other benefit to the cutaway discs up front is that then that sweep is hitting already loosened soil, so that soil is easier to push back into the row, being it's already been tilled once per se by that cutaway disc.
You ever turn the cutaway disc around when you're laying it by?
Give me 2 slides.
I'm sorry.
No problem. This is first pass. Last year, I believe, we had quite a bit of weed pressure. We had the disc killers set about 6.5 inches apart right there. Wouldn't recommend that if you're a beginner, but in that case, we had them set very tight. And the last third picture, you can see I was very, very happy with the job that we were able to set that cultivator to do. We use them a lot in soybeans. The other thing that with the cutaway discs, especially in soybeans, with what you can see is the weeds that come up in the row. As the beans grow faster, those weeds will start growing out towards the middle of the row looking for sunlight. So with that disc killer coming through and hooking everything as that weed starts growing up and growing towards the middle looking for sunlight, that disc killer comes along, grabs a hold of it, tears them out. Just some more pictures of when things go right. We've got the disc killers there running kind of underneath the canopy, sneaking in, pulling away from the rows of beans. Cultivating second pass, the ridging. This is, yes, we do turn the hillers around the opposite way to throw back at the row. And then we also there's a attachment that we put down on these. It's about a 3-inch piece of flat iron in the shape of a V that follows right behind the sweep. And that loose soil that the sweep cuts and lifts, that V then pushes that back out towards the row. So we end up with a 6 to 8 inch ridge or lay-by, furrow, whatever you want to call it, that works very well for burying grass. You can bury 6 to 8, even 10-inch tall grass if you get moving with those ridging wings down. And even if you don't completely kill that grass, if you bury 3/4 of it, you can slow it down enough to where it's not going to become a problem. A couple other quick tools we use: the mirrors, poor man's GPS, I call them. We also run a Buffalo Scout guidance hitch. It uses wands and hydraulically steers the cultivator compared to and these are very cheap, and they work pretty well once you get them dialed in and get used to using them.
What's your definition of very cheap?
Actually, not to put a plug in, I think Doug has one for sale, don't you? Oh, it's sold. What did you get for it?
The first generation Scouts, $650. That buys a very good one. I will have more for sale.
Okay. The question was, how much do these Scouts run? And one of the comments from the crowd was that $500-600 for the most part, you can buy a fairly good shape one. And talk to Doug Allard if you're looking for ones in the future.
Got a comment on the shield?
Soybeans, we run the tent shields. I think I've got them. The first pass, maybe I don't have a picture of them. First pass, we run the tent shields, which are a V that runs right on top of the row. I like them because we are moving a whole lot of dirt, and it protects that on top of the plant, and it allows you to throw a little bit of soil underneath of them. When the corn gets bigger, we generally take our shields off and let as much dirt move into the row as we can.
All right, so this is kind of a picture of one of our cultivators. We also use a Scout guide hitch, but I really don't like wands on guide hitches, because if a wand finds a weed and it likes it better than a corn plant, there goes, well, we're on 8 rows, so there goes 8 rows of your crop without you even knowing it. So we do run a corrected GPS auto steer system, which does the steering for us. And then I manually operate the guide hitch. I learned that from an older guy at a meeting once, and he said, let the tractor do the driving, it doesn't get distracted, and you can sit there, and if you see a weed that you don't like, you can just kind of bump it over and pick it off. So that's another aspect of doing it manually. But I will say, make sure your left and right are correct on your controls. The first time I tried it, I just about threw the controls through the window because things were not working right. So come to find out, left and right were reversed. So flip your controls over, run it right. So we run the 6300 with open shields. I like them because I think, Sam, you mentioned this, that you can alternate. If you've got a firmer row, you can raise a shield and let a little more dirt under, or, depending on where your crop is, you can adjust those together. I run our cutaway discs for first pass about 5.5 inches from opener to opener, or cutaway to cutaway. So it's very tight, but I like that in first pass because, like Eric was saying, it will just reach out and grab some of those bigger weeds. And yeah, I've been very happy with that for first pass. Typically, I'm running about, 3.8 to 4 miles per hour on first pass with this, with our GPS and then with the manual steer. It's a great way to get more accuracy out of your auto steer by using the Scout. Like they said, they're about $600 on big iron, I think. So, second pass, I use a weatherall, which this isn't your typical weatherall. Probably most of you think of a weatherall as a high residue cultivator. This is just a random model we found. Maybe you guys have seen this on Craigslist, and it was set up for 38-inch rows that we were on at the time, and we needed a cultivator, so we bought it. What we have added, you can kind of see flow shields, these right here. I like flow shields a lot. Who's heard of flow shields? Anyone using them right now? Okay, a few people are using them. I like them because it gives you another option for directing soil. So if you want to fill that row, like when you have a bigger plant and you've got space that you'd like to fill up with dirt, well, with a conventional till, you're generally not throwing that much dirt into the row. So what these do is it comes up the shank, it hits that flow shield, and I'll pitch them towards the row, and it'll hit that flow shield, bounce off, go right below your shield, right into your row. And so it gives you another option for reducing slabbing if you've got a little bit of a wet soil condition and you're getting a slab off that shank and it's jumping over your shield if you don't have a closed shield. You can lower these down, pitch them a little bit, it'll hit that flow shield, break them up, send it into the row, and be really gentle on your plant. So that's something that we really like. One thing I was going to say about our buffalo too, we've added another set of cutaway discs on our tire track row, because often with a buffalo, if you've run one to get your single sweep to drop below your tire track, we're usually running a tire track in the same row every pass. So I mean, you're running your rotary hoe on that same track, you're running your cultivator on that same track, so it tends to get harder than all the other rows. And so if you add another set of cutaway discs just inside of your outside ones, it tills that soil just a little bit and allows your sweep to kind of set in more gently. So instead of slabbing a big hunk and piece of dirt into your row and driving you nuts all day, It just kind of crumbles that up a little bit. You're still digging in, because once you get under that compaction, it's hard, but it just kind of breaks it up so you're not doing as much damage on your plant. Yeah, Doug. Well, we were at a field day. The question is, are we using the bolt-on attachment for the second cutaway? No, I'm not. We had an old 4-row sitting in the junk, and I went and it happened I could just unbolt it and bolt it onto the same bar. On the 6300, they have a bar on either side that holds your cutaway disc. Well, we just slapped another bracket on there with another one, and that way I can adjust where that cutaway disc is sitting in relation to the original. Because sometimes if you get those too close together and you're running a little wet, you're going to just plug those double discs right up. So if you can open it up a little bit and not have so much issue, that's something I've really enjoyed having on ours. Another thing on the Weatherall, it's a light cultivator. It's not built real heavy. So I've actually added some old tractor weights to the tire track row, just to get that row to sit nice. Otherwise, what happens is it sits there and it just bounces, because it's too hard to really drop in. So that's kind of what we do. And we use this one on second pass. The main reason is when I've got my cutaway discs out or really far away from the end of my sweep. And so there's probably a 2-inch gap between my cutaway and the end of my sweep on my buffalo. So when I bring the Weatherall back behind, it's in a different sweep pattern. And so that 2 inches that I missed with the buffalo, I'm not worried about, because I'm going to hit it with my Weatherall, and I'm going to take out those 2 inches. So that way I don't have to run a monster sweep on my buffalo and risk more slabbing. This way I can reduce that and then still get those weeds and not be frustrated. That was a good day when I figured that out, that we could pair that up. Yeah, we're on 36-inch rows now. The question was, how wide are we? This is just an example of first pass with our buffalo. Again, set pretty tight. And then second pass, that's kind of the height I look for. And then if we are going to do a third pass, I'll go out and scout. So this is kind of what's left, what did we miss. And this is a good year. You always have your one field, and I think I've got some pictures of our other one field that's always not good. So, yeah, any questions on any of that? Yeah.
Your flow control shields?
The flow shield, the question is, yeah.
Is that similar to what Henniker has with tillers? And are they poly shields?
No, they're a steel shield. They're very simple. They're just 2 bolts, and they're a piece of flat steel bent at a 90-degree angle so that you can bolt it onto the shank. Here, let me go back. I don't know if we can. You can't really see it, Eric. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. I don't know if you can quite see them, but it's very simple. Eric can probably demonstrate it on the
Graphic picture. Basically, if you have your sweep here coming down, the flow shield is simply just a piece of flat iron with clamps on the back of the shank here. And what happens as that soil comes along here and comes up the shank, it hits that shield, and that shield then shoots the soil back down.
The horizontal.
Correct.
Yeah,
It's
yep.
a horizontal to the sweep.
And I-
Literally, when you look at it from the side view, this is all it is.
Yeah.
That L bracket, 2 bolts come through here. We actually made our own.
Yeah, you can make them. They're very simple.
Yep, and that just clamps on to your shank.
And one thing I've noticed is if you are gonna use them, you need to play with them and figure them out, because there's no guarantee of what height you want to set them. They kind of have a guideline, the manufacturer does, but I kind of threw that out the window and we just started playing with them. So also, if you run them flat, what can happen is if you have wet soils, it'll lodge right there and just create a big V, and it'll just start plowing soil right into your rows. So that's another thing that I learned, that you just need to pitch them. So let's just keep moving here. All right. Dean?
So I use a little bit different cultivator than these guys use. I'm running a John Deere AT40 front mount, and this is what over here we call front mount. Isn't the same thing as it is across the pond, I guess, where it's what across the pond they'd call probably a mid mount. It bolts on, basically it comes around, swings around, bolts onto the frame of the tractor. It's in between the front wheel and the back wheel. Pretty simple. And I'm on 38-inch rows, and I'm running, and it's a 4-row. What I like about the Cultivator is that the shanks, they're rigid. So you can adjust them up and down individually, each one. You can also, they're also angle adjustable. You can adjust the angles of the sweeps to do what you need them to do. You can also take the shank and give it a turn one way or the other, because it's a round shaft. So you can twist it one way or the other. If you're pushing too much dirt towards the row, you give it a little turn one way, and it'll push less dirt towards the row. That's kind of what I like about that. It also has the gauge wheels. You can adjust the overall depth of it all. I kind of gotta speed this up a little bit, but basically I've run finger weeders with it. I've made my mounts to put finger weeders on it. Last year was my first year doing it. They worked really good last year. This year I wasn't able to use them because of the weather. It was too wet, and if you get too much corn stalk trash, it'll build up in between the fingers, and it doesn't work very good. I've also made my own hillers or pieces of metal to throw the dirt, kind of similar to what Sam was just showing on his. Basically, I made my own brackets to bolt on the same bolts that I bolt on the sweep to, and it's just a piece of metal coming out to shoot the dirt into the row crops to push any weeds over. And this is for corn. I don't use them. Don't use them in soybeans. And as far as when I cultivate, I go out as soon as possible. So it could be the day after I rotary hoe. I've done it the last three years. I've had to go out the day after I rotary hoe because the weeds were there. The best time to get the weeds is when they're as small as possible. And I think that year, my 1 year, I had to go third gear on the John Deere 4020. So it took me pretty much all day to do 25 acres. So it took me a little over 3 days to do all my corn. The funny thing is, going from corn to soybeans, for some reason I can go a little faster in soybeans. I think maybe it's just because the ground's structure's a little bit different because of the corn trash that's in there. It mellows the ground out a little bit better. So after the first pass, usually a week later, I'm back in there. Kind of whether I see weeds or not, I'm back in there. If I see weeds before that, I'm back in there. If I had a weed problem after the first time going through, turn around, do it again, except turn around, go the opposite way that you went the time before. And basically the main thing about it is if you see a sweep that you need to readjust it to make it work, because you're only going to be able to go as fast as what your worst sweep is doing. So if you can kind of get them all to do the same thing, you're going to go a constant speed. Your dirt's going to go kind of where you want it to go. And a lot of times, without those finger weeders, especially in soybeans, I noticed you'd be cultivating along, and from the tractor seat, you can think I'm doing a great job. When you get off the tractor seat and you go down and you look in that soybean row, you can see that you're not quite getting the dirt where you want it to go. So with the finger weeders, I set them so they push everything closer into the row to basically squash out any light that the weed could potentially get through. I've had really good luck with that. And as far as when Stefan asked me to do this, and we were talking about this, and Eric goes, "Dean, you gotta talk about soybeans. You do the best job of anybody I know." And I was like, okay. So I'm gonna talk about equipment. Well, that's great. But my thought was, why am I so much more successful than the next guy. Well, what I do is I'm not sitting on the couch every day. Like in the mornings, when April comes around, I'm outside. I walk around out in the fields, and that's what I do. I'm out there looking every single day. I'm not just once a week. Oh, I'm going to go out and look at this field once a week. No, I'm out there every single day. I'm making a plan. If I see something, I could potentially have a day, 2 days to come up with a plan and figure something out. So I can get ahead of everything. So basically, what it's come down to the last ever since I started cultivating, I've been able to do a really good job of getting my weeds. And with the front mount, you can drive the tractor where you need it to go. You can get close to the row. You can drive it where you would need to go. It's not like a rear mount. If you turn the wheel this way, it's going to push the cultivator that way. You just kind of drive it where you want it to go. And so over the years, I've walked my beans by myself. I've walked 60 acres by myself, and I've done it within a week. And it's I guess for me, it's kind of something I'm proud of, that I'm able to do that by myself. And at the end of the year, I got something I'm pretty darn proud of to look at. And it's not just going out and walk them. I don't go out a day and walk 8 hours a day. I go out and I walk 3 hours in the morning. I might not walk in the afternoon. I might walk in the evening for 3 hours. That's kind of my daily thing. It's like you get up, you go out, you check your fields, you walk them, and that's what you do. I'm not really a fan of hiring crews to come in. They're really expensive. This last year, I've found high schoolers, families that want to walk beans, and so when I hire them, I don't hire them to walk all day long. They can come in the evening. They love walking in the evening. A couple of hours in the evening, they love it. You don't burn them out, and you can watch them and see what they're doing and train them. And the next year they come, they're that much better yet. So basically, the moral of the whole story is you got to go out there. You got to watch what's going on. You got to get off the tractor seat, walk around, see what's working, see what's not working. If something totally isn't working out for you, pick up the phone, call the next guy and see what he's doing, what's working for him, what's not working for him. There's nothing wrong with picking up a phone and asking questions. So with that, is there any final questions for anybody?
Have any of you tried the chrome alloy hardened sweeps on your cultivators? The ones that say they don't rust up or they flow better. Have any of you experimented with them? The question was if we had experimented with the hard-faced cultivator sweeps. I guess we have not. We run the hard-faced ones on our mulch master just because they wear out the most and do the most cutting action through the hardest soil. But I guess we have not tried them on any of the actual smaller cultivator sweeps. Has anybody else in here tried them? Probably no. And I guess our soils probably aren't quite as abrasive as yours are. Maybe could be part of it too. Other questions?
Well, one thing, I'm more of a no-tiller, so I try not to kill more than once out of 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try not to ridge anything on the corn ear, because you're going to have to live with it if you do. That's the only thing.
Yep.
No-till into the.
Are you doing like a rye no-till?
Rye after I spread the stalk, I do a rye to that, and I do a rye for the bean going into beans, and then I no-till into that and fall after the beans.
Okay.
So I got ridge enough that I got to live with it.
Right, right.
Carry the back end out.
One of the comment was one of the audience guys says that he no-tills rye into his corn stalk, so he doesn't like to make the great big ridges like what we probably do. And I'll agree with that, and it is hard on equipment, especially your combine when you're coming around your end rows and bouncing across those ridges. What we've done sometimes is with a light disc, come back, just follow after you open your field up, come back and lightly disc those end rows just to make it a little bit easier on the combine. But yes, be thinking ahead if you are going to want to try something like a no-till rye experiment or something. You maybe don't want to make such a great big ridge or hill around with that last cultivation. Time for one more question.
Doesn't really relate, but I got fence row, really high giant ragweed, CRP across it. And other years it was conventional crops, and I kind of neglected it. Now I can have organic crops right up to it, but it's pretty much giant ragweed from the fence row and maybe in 15 to 30 feet. Is there anything I can vinegar or something that would spray in there, or has anybody got any ideas?
Question was what to do with a giant ragweed problem in the first 30 feet or so of a field. Anybody have any experience with any of the vinegar sprays or any suggestions? Yeah.
There's not a vinegar spray, but there's organic herbicide that's ONRI approved. It's expensive though. I can't, does anyone know the name of it?
Weed slayer?
It's not, Axe is who makes it now. I'm not sure what the generic name is. Someone came out, the name of it now is Axe, and you can buy it in bulk, but it's expensive, but you can douse ragweed with it and kill it, but you have to soak the plant, and it's not, it's more cost effective to plant late and try to get a good kill on ragweed from my experience.
You can kill it with a weed zapper.
What was the name of the chemical again?
I think it's Axe, A-X-E.
AXE was the name of the, is it a non-selective, I believe?
Yes.
Correct. Okay, it's a non-selective OMRI approved herbicide.
One thing that we've done for our fence rows, if you have issues, sometimes we have a small garden tiller and we'll just run that the boundary of the field, and that kind of puts a little bit of a reset on everything right next to your row. So I mean that's something you could play with too.
Okay, let's thank Dean, Jaron, and Eric. Thank you very much.